Welcome to the Regulating AI podcast. This is Sanjay Puri. We bring leaders who have diverse backgrounds to help us formulate a fair, responsible AI framework for governance and regulation. And today I'm joined by Sean Musch, the founder and CEO of AI Partners. Welcome to the Regulating AI podcast, Sean.
Hey, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Sean, we have a global audience around the world, AI
Yeah,
experts, regulators, etc. Just tell them very briefly what AI and Partners does and what was the genesis of you starting this company?
yeah, of course. So 4 years ago we started, and then we saw the European AI Act, and what we saw is the definition of AI. So you have the academic definition and the legal definition, and the legal definition is much bigger in scope. And what we saw is basically what we saw, and what we're trying to do is like, let's already try this with companies, and like, how does that process work? So what we did is we tested out over 100 companies, like how are those workflows, and what we actually found out, the hardest part was identifying AI models and AI systems, because the realization focuses on AI systems. So, for example, you use Google Translate. Google Translate has a little bit over 40 models in it. So that means basically every model needs to be individually assessed. And that was a big problem to figure that out for companies. So what we do is it goes into the cloud and it identifies actually everything, all your algorithms, AI models, LLMs, whatever actually around it. And you can self-assess them by the regulation what is applied.
No, that's very important. We are at a big AI conference, and there's obviously a lot of talk about responsible AI. Sean, since you started the company, how do you see the AI regulatory framework? There have been a lot of changes in Europe, especially,
Yeah.
and around the world. Tell our audience as to where do we stand in terms of a regulatory framework?
I think that's a hard choice. So basically, what we did in the software was a big hurdle also, because we helped with the frameworks. And what we found out is actually every company wants to have their own framework.
Mm.
So there is no one fits all. And what we also see, because clients have the software longer, what we see is they want to have more industry diagnostic frameworks also for them. So with us, you can all put that in freely, and then basically the software works on your own framework. And I wouldn't say, like, I hear a lot of stories about what is the best framework, but a framework is nothing else than following the regulation.
Mm.
And of course, in some cases, there will be difference and needs to be more industry diagnostic. But also at the same time, I think we are making it really complicated.
So making it complicated, Sean, the EU AI Act is the most comprehensive, the first one or
Yeah.
the biggest comprehensive. For our listeners who are listening, who maybe are not as familiar with companies, etc., tell them very briefly in terms of companies who need to comply with them, what should they be thinking about?
Now, what companies? Now, it is basically the bigger multinationals, the SMEs to start with, and you can actually expect the same flow as GDPR, in my opinion.
Mm.
So that are the main companies, and of course, the first companies that will regulate is probably healthcare, because everything in healthcare will be high risk.
Mhm.
And that is going to be a struggle for them, just like GDPR, but also a really big struggle for them. But also, you need to think an organization has thousands of AI systems, because with this regulation, it's for user, maker, and supplier. And I think a lot of people forget that, because a lot of the times companies come to us or we go to them, and they will say to us, we don't use AI, we don't have AI.
Mm.
Um, but as simple as a chatbot is already seen as AI. A spam filter on your Gmail can already seen as AI by the regulation, because the legal terminology of AI is basically everything that is automate decision making based on data
Mm.
is an AI system. So, for example, with GDPR, we try to regulate the data, and you need to see the data as gasoline. And with the European AI Act, we're regulating the combustion engine. So everything what gives a certain input and puts a certain output on is classified as an AI system.
So, Sean, what you're saying is it might not be obvious to you that you're using AI or you're maybe complying with AI, but it's your entire supply chain also that you're kind of responsible for their systems too. Is that what you're kind of saying to our audience?
Yeah, also 100%. So there's also a lot of products that, for example, you have a French voice recognition system, and you put that in a medical device, what is from an Indian company.
Hmm.
That means that Indian company needs to be compliant. If that
Hmm.
Indian company sells that device, for example, to the UK,
Hmm.
then that part also needs to be compliant again, because it's again that affiliation to the EU.
Wow. Um, Sean, in terms of there is a fragmentation of regulations.
Yeah.
As you know, we have the EU AI Act in the United States. We don't have a comprehensive AI regulation.
Yeah.
We have some state regulations, etc. Um, and the rest of the world is still trying to figure out for companies. I mean, how do you deal with all this fragmentation? Is this an opportunity for you, or how do you work with companies who probably can't hire big lawyers, etc., or don't have the resources? What would be your advice to some of them?
Nah, it makes it quite simple around this for the smaller companies. So the startups, the
Mm-hmm.
micro entrepreneurs, or basically, you probably already know what are your high risk models,
Mm.
and it's also not that hard because it's what you use, but also how do you use it. So a lot of systems under HR, for example, are high risk. Now that
Mm.
is seen as credit scoring, but also with GDPR, we are now at a conference, and probably if we go to the booths over here, people will come to you and we will say we're GDPR compliance. Actually, the only thing what they're saying is we have an ISO 27001. With the European AI Act, it has four risk categories. That is low, limited, high, and unacceptable risk. Low and limited risk will be covered by the ISO 42001.
Mm.
So just like you see the same procedures actually as the European AI Act, and I think also the EU will not target the smaller organizations first
Mm.
because it is a global regulation.
So what you're saying is the smaller companies can fly under the radar because they are not going to get targeted, but larger companies need compliance, right, Sean?
I think you need to put effort in it. And I think you just with GDPR, when you see everybody has ISO 27001, I think in 3, 4 years, also the smaller companies will acquire an ISO
Mhm.
42001. Um, yeah, to have that certification. So again, the same roadmap actually as GDPR in that sense.
Sean, your background is in auditing.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, what will be the role of AI audits looking into the future? Tell our audience a little bit about that, whether it is with the EU Act or other frameworks. Do you see AI audits happening across companies?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So talk a little bit about that.
Now, with auditing, of course, you have a lot of samples. That's one thing, basically. So you take sample sizes. Now, one thing what is required by the EU AI Act is
Mm.
every AI system needs to be have a self assessment.
Mm.
So, for example, an algorithm seen as a lot of algorithms are seen as an AI system, prompt, and the model, and LLM. So you have as a user, yeah, you have thousands of AI systems that you have.
Mm.
So you're going to report a lot around this.
Mhm.
Now you're going to we're going to I'm going to think basically that will get a lot of sample sizes from those and then check them basically if they're categorized in the right way. Because companies don't want to be under the high risk factor. Now,
Mm.
why? Everything under high risk is going to be publicly available for the
Mm.
audience. So if you have a high risk system, that means you need to tell how do you use it and where do you use it for to the public. So, but that is your digital strategy. So a lot of companies or are have an intention like we would rather don't have that
Mm.
high risk because we public, and also your costs are going much up because model monitoring is also a requirement, for example.
No, that's very helpful. Sean, you talk to a lot of companies. Do you see a sense of urgency from companies, C level? or do you see it from larger companies, mid-sized companies, small companies? Tell our audience, is there a sense of urgency to be in compliance? And if it is what size of companies it is?
It really depends also on the industry. So we really see in each which industry is
Mm.
more afraid
Mm.
than the other ones. So we see, for example, within hospitals, there's a real urgency, like, oh, we would like to be
Mm.
compliant because they're
Okay.
they're a public organization,
Mm.
organization. Now, then, for example, they have a lot of medical equipment, so they need to know with all their medical equipment how does that algorithms, how does those models
Yeah.
basically are used. Now, then basically the companies that are above that of medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, whatever actually in that are actually not that urged to be compliant because they need to figure out how are they going to handle this.
Hmm.
So they see in the medical space there's more urgency. Now for finance we see some companies, so
Mm.
especially the fintechs, we see a bigger urge than for example all traditional finance. But it is also still a lot of discovering and still a lot of understanding for a lot of companies how how does it impact my business.
Mm.
And I think we're now in the middle of the understanding phase. People now heard of it. They understand it a bit. They understand this is going to be really big,
Mm.
but how is this going to impact me? Is still, I think, a big question mark for a lot.
So, Sean, according to you, it really depends on the industry. There are some industries like healthcare, maybe fintech, who feel a more sense of an urgency,
Yeah,
and others don't. Sean, in terms of transparency of data and obviously biases, which is something that
yeah.
is what you advise, guide, or your solution provides, how careful should companies and people be towards this from using AI systems?
It is how biased in what for data you give it.
Mm.
I mean, of course, there are biased systems, and there's really, really, really a lot of focus on this regulation. But I would say, with the problem of this regulation, isn't like what I what we talk a lot about is how does the exception look like? So
Mm.
how everybody also with the frameworks, how are we going to look for the exception of the thousands of systems? But the
Mm.
biggest problem with the regulation is the bulk. It
Mm.
is just such a huge form of bulk. So we identified also in the organization tens of thousands AI systems
Mm.
by regulation terms, and they and it's just so much work to identify, understand how you use it, categorize it. And that's what we help a big part with. It really the bulk part, and
Mm.
that exception part will be really really small. So I think that's going to be the most effort for companies. Organize just like GDPR. With GDPR, the regulation wasn't the problem. The problem was categorizing and understanding your data. With the
Mm.
European AI Act, it's going to be understanding and categorizing how do you use your AI systems, because the biggest problem is companies don't even know that they have them, and that's how with our platform how we identify them.
So categorizing data, identifying data, I think is what you're saying
The AI systems.
for the AI
Yeah,
systems. Sean, a lot of leaders that we talk to are saying they're moving towards synthetic data, which is AI
yeah,
generated data, in the hopes of moving away from
yeah.
some of these challenges. Do you think synthetic data will help protect you from inherent biases or these challenges? What are your views for our listeners who are trying to go down this path?
Like we don't do that personally, and I we know companies that do that, and some companies who don't do that.
Mhm.
I think it's also really dependent what industry, and it's also it's dependent on so much basically around it. I cannot give a general good answer basically. I
Mm.
mean, there are examples that it really works, and there are
Mm.
examples that it really doesn't work. So
Mm.
it depends basically how do you use it, and also, again, what you're talking also about understanding your AI system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it depends on the AI systems. Sean, when you look into the future, from an AI standpoint, use of data, things of that nature, again, the technology is moving so rapidly, innovation,
Yeah.
whether it's multimodal agents, things of that nature. What do you see the role of regulations? I mean, agents now have
Yeah, yeah.
become the big thing. If companies are using agents, should they be still worried about regulation and compliance?
I mean, the good thing is regulation. It is for everybody. So, I mean,
Mm,
competitiveness. Yeah, if you're in a tighter industry, if you're in the medical industry, that means the whole medical industry needs to do it. And if you need to do, if you're finance, then the whole finance industry do that. And what I hear a lot, um, it's against innovation,
mhm,
regulation. But what you're saying, it's going so fast. And I think that's also why the EU put this regulation in forth, and also why the US is in favor of this regulation because they didn't
mhm,
cancel it, and also the other countries around it is it's going so fast, and that's why the terminology of AI is so broad. So with the
mhm,
terminology, legal terminology is everything was automated decision making based on data. It's an AI system basically, and I think they put such a broad term in there just it's going so fast and they need to put a point somewhere on and they cannot regulate as fast as the technology goes
mhm.
and the same situation actually is GDPR then when we were back.
No, that's it. Technology is moving so fast. Um, Sean, finally, to our audience who are focused on regulation, compliance, etc., what would be one actionable piece of advice that you would give to them?
Yeah, so what we always say with the regulation is identify your AI systems.
Hmm.
That's what we do also.
Hmm.
Do make your self-assessment,
Hmm.
understand your self-assessment, and step three is understanding your legal challenges then.
Hmm.
Because what we see a lot, people are talking about, we have this model and this regulation, it's going to be so hard and everything like that. But you're talking about one model. You're
Hmm.
using thousands of models, and you need to make thousands of self-assessments. So that means start understand what you have. So open your view and look how many systems actually do I use. Then your self-assessments, and then you can look at your legal challenge.
Hmm.
And what a lot of people are doing now is looking first at my legal challenge before knowing what you actually have.
So look at what you have, categorize it, evaluate. I think, Sean,
Yeah,
those are very important things.
yeah. So
The,
just like start with just start in steps. Start at the beginning. What do I actually have? And then step two. Okay, I need to do the self assessments. So what are my risk levels actually within that by the legal terminology?
mm,
And then step three is looking at like to your law firm. How do I get from high risk to low risk, for example, for what companies do, or for example, how do I get workarounds around this? For example, and also um, how can I make sure that my procedures still stay the same, and how can I impact that? If you don't do that, you're actually shooting into the dark.
So for our audience, do make an inventory, do a self-assessment, and then decide which path you want to go, whether it's a law firm or tool or however you want
They
to
have
work.
different functions basically around it. So a law firm will more give you legal advice around it.
Mhm.
Consultants and accountants will be more about the compliance part around this. Um, Also more about standards basically that play into what will play into role.
Mhm.
But first, identify how much you have because it's for user, maker, and supplier. And like we find thousands of AI systems in companies that only think they have a few, and that's
Mhm.
almost every company have that.
No, wonderful. Sean, at the end, we do this lightning round.
Yeah,
Just a couple of very quick questions with a one-word answer from you for our audience.
yeah,
You ready?
yeah.
Okay. Innovation or regulation?
Regulation,
Oh, wow. Well, you run a regulation company. Uh, Privacy or transparency?
transparency,
Okay. Human generated data or synthetic data?
human data.
Human data. Okay, awesome. Sean, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. And to for our listeners, your perspective on the EU AI Act plus global regulation as to how to get in compliance, how to do an assessment, and how to continue, work, whether you're a small company or a big company, how you can work in this field, I think is very, very insightful for our listeners. And I
Yeah,
hope you got our listeners got a lot from Sean, who's been doing this now for a period of time. and continue listening to Regulating AI, where we try to bring leaders so that we can continue innovating, but doing it responsibly.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for being on the podcast, Sean.
Thank you also so much.
Thank you.
Hey.